Papenburg, northern Germany, construction on the new P&O superliner Aurora has hardly begun when the engines have to be installed. They're huge and will generate 79,860 horsepower, more than that generated by 165 Ferraris or 1,331 Ford Escorts. But you can't drop an engine into a completed ship as you could the engine of a car, so they're fitted early and the ship's built round them.
The engine is in the lower part of the vessel, and that means we have to get them very early, much earlier than the ship will be finished. Therefore, we have to plan that in the very beginning, what kind of engines we have to bring in. It's no problem from the weight side, because our lifting capacity will be about 600 tons, so the weight of the engine is much less. Therefore, we have no problem at all. But you have to have a very exact planning for that you get them in right in time, and then they are standing there for a year in the ship till they can be started. So also that is different to maybe other ships.
Engineers in particular are acutely aware of the potential problems caused by vibration once the engines are up and running.
The engines themselves are actually fitted on resilient mounts, so they're actually on large pieces of rubber, but they are connected by a highly flexible coupling to the generator, so that and everything else that connects the engine is flexible, whether it be a cooling water pipe or a fuel oil pipe. So with that reason, everything is done possibly to any vibration that comes from the engine is minimised. These are a V14 format, which are more compact, more space-saving, and produce a lot more power in the space used. And each one of those drives its own separate generator, which is connected to the electrical distribution system, and as I say, we split that as required for propulsion or hotel load.
The Meyer-Werft yard is 45 kilometres from the sea up the River Ems. And as the engines and generators aren't manufactured at the yard, they have to be brought up the river by barges and then taken off by crane. The Aurora has been designed as a diesel-electric ship rather than diesel-mechanical, as was the case with her sister ship, Oriana. The diesel-mechanical system means the engines directly drive the propellers through a gearbox. On Aurora, the engines will be used to generate electricity, which is then used not just for the propellers, but also as power for things such as lighting and air conditioning. They'll generate 58,800 kilowatts of power, enough to supply the city of Oxford and its 115,000 inhabitants. The technical aspects of a huge ship have a direct effect on the designers.
We've got an opening here, and we've put all our walls where we want them to be, and now we've got to put fire doors.
Okay.
And what it's got to do is to protect the cathedral there above.
In London, Alison Clixby is wrestling with the question of how to design around the large fire doors required throughout the ship.
Put the entrance.
Café Bordeaux, Champions and Monte Carlo Casino. There you've got lots of different functions in a small space, and you need to create this atrium feel, the cutout between the decks. And for us, the size of the hole means that you have to have certain fire doors to separate the decks. So you're trying to create two different fire zones between what is essentially one space. So you're having to cut it in half, but trying not to do that visually.
It's a difficult task, but the designers have a new device to help them overcome some of their problems. A virtual reality video that shows the interior of the ship before it's even been built. It's the first time that P&O's employed this kind of technology for this purpose. It was created by a company based in the West End of London called Three Blind Mice. Although experienced in film and television advertising, they'd never before gone for anything like this or anything this big.
In order to gain their confidence, because this was a very new thing, not just for P&O but for everyone else who's using this sort of technology, we did test animations for them. So we took a room that was Anderson's room from Oriana and actually did a test animation for them so that they could actually be confident that what we were actually suggesting to them would work in the end. We were given a full package from each of the architects. We were then given a sample boards of all the textures and materials that we used within the rooms. Then we were given all the examples of the furniture, that they might be photographs or plan drawings, etc. And it was given to us as a whole package, so that from the start we were working with a completely designed room, which sort of helped a lot, really.
This is how the plans are supplied to us when we first get them. They're just completely flat, as it would be, because they're only two-dimensional. And based on that information, we go through and model. Here's one of the children's areas here.
The picture is quite literally built up layer by layer. And although originally conceived as a marketing tool, these graphics were to have a profound effect on the way the designers worked.
In a desert wasteland, they buried their dead. Forgotten for 1,000 years. Now in a discovery expedition adventure, the desert mummies of Peru tell their stories. Part of the Mummy Showcase, next Sunday 8 p.m. on Discovery Channel.
One of the ways in which Aurora was breaking new ground was in the use of an advanced form of CAD, or virtual reality graphics, to recreate the interiors of the ship.
This was a fabulous development. It really was very exciting to watch these people build the inside of the ship in their computers, because we could then see these interiors in ways which we had never previously been able to. And they were available nearly 12 months before the delivery of the ship. It helped us in a number of ways. It helped us to conceive and see the rooms in 3 dimensions, to make final amendments to the architecture and the interior design. It allowed us to produce a very exciting promotional video where we could show our customers precisely what the inside of the ship looked like, well before they could ever see it in actuality. We also used those images in our inaugural brochure for the Aurora, and again that added to the excitement and very importantly gave the customers far more hard information about precisely what they were going to they could expect on the ship.
For the designers, it meant they got advance warning of potential problems.
Quite a difficult problem was getting the seating into Carmen's, because the requirement was actually 500 seats and the room was just not big enough to house that many people. We had to include a bar, which is different from Oriana, to attract passengers for pre- and post-cabaret drinks. And we also had to maintain a 100-metre square dance floor for ballroom dancing, and that was a really specific requirement that was maintained.
Away from the pressing problems of the showroom in the heart of southern England, the problem of what was going to adorn it was being worked on by Australian sculptor Les Johnson. This being a truly multicultural operation, he'd been given a Latin American theme to tackle.
The basic idea comes from P&O. They have asked for a Latin American dance theme throughout, and each of the individual dancers are inspired by one of the Latin American passionate dancers. And these sculptures will be going inside the nightclub area into niches in the wall. There will be 6 niches and 6 individual dancing figures going inside the wall. And 2 life-size figures will be going outside in the foyer, in the entrance, and they are of a dancing couple inspired by the tango. In this case, I worked in clay. I personally start to work from the bone structure out to the surface. Because I studied anatomy, I find it easier to work with the bones, get the bone structure right. Once you get all the bone lengths right, you've got the proportions right, then you add the muscular surface to that. And I do the figures nude to start with, and add the clothes over the top of that, so that all the anatomy is right and the clothes are touching and stretching in the right places. Once the clay model has been approved by P&O, then it's handed over to Bronze Art Foundry. The whole process is going to take approximately 12 months. This is from the time when I did the original drawings through to the time when the foundry completes it and it's shipped over to be installed in Germany.
Meanwhile, back in Papenburg, Aurora is starting to take on the shape of a ship. Shower and toilet units stand on deck, ready to be fitted. Only now can the sheer size of the ship be grasped. Three Statues of Liberty from base to tip of torch could lie end to end alongside the 270-metre-long ship. Although Aurora is slightly larger than sister ship Oriana, 76,000 gross tons as opposed to Oriana's 69,000, she's taking less time to build, 15 months versus Oriana's 24 months. At the peak, the Meyer-Werft yard will have up to 3,500 people working on the ship. That's in addition to the permanent P&O technical team that's been on site since construction began. One of the major jobs on a ship is the manufacturing of the galleys. They'll be worked hard, having to cater for 2,724 people, made up of some 1,800 passengers and 830 crew.
The galley and the catering equipment on board a ship, it has to be a lot more robust than obviously the equipment you'll find in a hotel. In addition to that, it has to be designed to allow for various safety standards. Obviously a ship moves and a hotel doesn't, so we have to allow that in the design of various equipment. In addition to that, there's various regulatory bodies around the world who have strict regulations, and the equipment has to comply with that as well.
The contract to make the stainless steel equipment throughout the ship has gone to a company based in Charnków in western Poland. Finnish-owned Sea King specializes in the heavy-duty steel needed for a ship's equipment. International health regulations are tough, particularly for ships visiting the United States. But it wasn't just skill and expertise that led P&O to Poland. Money plays a part too.
I think that the main reason was that in Poland was the good opportunity to find quite well-educated workers, but our working cost is still on very low level compared to Western country. So the owner decided to build their own factory here in Charnków, because in Charnków, previous and time being, there are few companies which has experience to produce goods made by stainless steel. Because to produce goods by stainless steel, you need a special technology, special knowledge and special experience.
Whilst work continues, P&O people come out to check out a cold food display that's never been used on one of their ships before. The system uses cold air that's wafted over the trays to keep the food at a low temperature. It's vital that the temperature is the same across the whole tray. It'll be checked by public health and safety officers when the ship visits America, so it's vital to get it right.
We're here to see the first iteration of a piece of equipment that we're going to use in our buffet area. It's a cold display unit and actually chills air using cold air, as opposed to the traditional bunker well, which is refrigerated from underneath. So most particularly, we're looking to make sure that the equipment has been changed to embodying the requests we made previously. Okay, 2.4. And very importantly, that the food temperatures are maintained within the legal requirements that we have to work. The corner here is now 5.1 degrees centigrade. And the observation that I would make is that the holes finished here. Overall, there have been some very good temperatures maintained. We do have concerns in a couple of the areas at the moment. There appears to be one dead corner where the cold air isn't flowing around sufficiently to keep the food temperature cool, because this equipment is not designed to chill food. It's designed to maintain food at the temperature in which we put it in, and we monitor those conditions very carefully. Just above 4 degrees, isn't it? That's about...
Well, I had 3.9 on one reading, the last one was 4.3. Can we just do that one again?
At the end of the day, all of our food has to be within temperature, not just part of it, and it's critical that we observe those standards.
P&O like what they see, and the first of 35 lorries sets off to drive the 350 kilometers to the German yard. In Papenburg itself, the time has come to partially flood the dock in preparation for the ship being moved down the construction hall. And today, it's the job of a diver to go under the hull to check, quite literally, that there aren't any leaks. Before it was flooded, workmen walked under the ship, making sure that all the plugs in the hull were in place. And whilst he's down there, more workmen check the hull from inside the ship.
Ob du schon irgendwelche anderen Sachen gekühlt hast? Flaschen oder andere Hölzer, Kanthölzer?
Ich habe hier nichts anderes gefühlt. Das Einzige, was man vorstellt, sind solche komischen Haken, wo ich mit Schlauch drin hängen bleibe. Und sonst ist oben alles frei. Das Einzige, was anzogen hängt, ist eine Plane, eine Folie so ein bisschen.
Aber die Folie ist nicht schlimm.
Ne, aber
Klebt unterm Schiffsboden, dass die Holzbohle nicht abreißt, dann reißt nur die Folie ab.
Whilst the diver is down, the dock is only filled to the point just below that which would make the ship lift off the bottom. Only when he gives the okay is more water flooded in and the ship floats for the very first time. A temporary handle is then welded onto the ship, which will be used to help guide it further down the dock. Then, for the first time, the ship moves, guided by trolleys on rails by the dockside. But even now, not all the hull is complete. The bow of the ship is still missing. The ship's built with its stern facing the covered yard's exit and open water, so that only a short section will have to poke out into the elements when the funnel is fitted. Tugs aren't used to move the ship at this point. They're too imprecise, so a system of cables and winches which can move the ship backwards and forwards is employed. At this stage, as it moves centimetre by centimetre, it's hard to imagine that the rust-red hull will become a gleaming white liner capable of cruising the world's oceans at 24 knots an hour. The ship is built in prefabricated blocks, each of which is numbered. The blocks are then welded together. There are 62 blocks in total. At last, block number 59, the bow, is lowered into position. Apart from the 939 cabins, 376 of which will have private outside balconies, there are more than 20 public areas. For some holidaymakers, none of those areas are more important than the swimming pools. And again, virtual reality videos have been used to help the designers and builders in one of the most innovative features of the new ship, the crystal pool with its groundbreaking sky dome.
We have equipped here Aurora with a sky dome. This is the biggest sky dome we have ever built here on our yard, with dimensions of 20 by 20 meter. It's constructed in 4 sections, and together with the architect and with the designer, we have looked into the possibility to incorporate the whole structure into the silhouette of the ship. So everything is so curved as the areas which are connected to the sky dome.
The dome itself was built in Italy, in Mestre near Venice. It's the 15th sky dome the company have made, but the first for a P&O ship. The dome is constructed in 3 panels, which telescope inside each other, rather like a Russian doll. It's planned that when installed, they'll be able to do this in under 5 minutes. And although the rest of the ship is made of steel for strength, the sky dome sitting on top of the ship has to be light and is made of aluminium. Even then, the designers and the manufacturers were also asked by P&O to use as little metal as possible.
The other demand which we had from the architect and from the owner was to make the structure as light as possible and to produce as big as possible glass areas on top. And so the whole frame concept is constructed as a framework, not longer as closed sections. It's really to bring most as possible light into the pool area underneath.
Back in Germany, deep in the bowels of the ship, the propeller shafts are being fitted. It's a delicate job, even though at times it doesn't actually look like one. In Aurora, the propellers will be what's known as fixed pitch. In other words, the blades themselves can't swivel.
In a fixed pitch propeller, the blades are at a fixed angle, and to vary the thrust you vary the speed, and if you want the thrust in the reverse direction you have to reverse the direction of the propeller, and that's very easily done with electric motors, with modern solid-state drive systems, which are now very efficient and well developed, and you have infinite control over the speed and direction of rotation of the propeller, so it's a very flexible plant.
The propellers themselves are being made in Poland at the ABB plant in Elblag. Molten bronze being poured into the molds is the first part of the process. Once the metal has cooled, the molds are removed and the job of planing down the surfaces begins. When Aurora's sister ship, Oriana, was launched a few years earlier, she developed vibration problems at high speed that were eventually traced to the propeller system. The problems resulted in the ship having to be taken out of service for a while whilst it was repaired. Everyone working on this ship is determined to take infinite pains to make sure that that experience isn't repeated with the new superliner. P&O's new superliner, Aurora, is starting to take shape at the shipyard in Papenburg in northern Germany. The basic hull structure is complete, and the business of outfitting can begin. Again, the team has the benefit of a virtual reality video to guide them as to what the final result should look like. This is the mini atrium section of the ship, with its 24-hour restaurant, the first one ever on a P&O ship. The Curzon Theatre is state-of-the-art and has 660 seats, each of which is fitted with its own flow of air conditioning. The stage stretches 24 meters across, with a 10-metre wide proscenium arch. It has 4 separate orchestra pit lifts, plus 2 revolving stage rails. The Orangery is the ship's self-service restaurant. It can seat 400 passengers and can also be used as a dance bar at night. For passengers, the focal point of the ship will be the atrium. 4 decks high, it has at its centre a 10.5-metre high relief statue and waterfall. There's more water in the ship's 3 swimming pools. Every day, the ship's desalination and cleaning plant will freshen 1,200 tons of seawater into water clean enough to drink. 40% of the cabins have been designed to have private balconies, more than any other ship that sails regularly out of Britain. The ultimate luxury, though, for those that can afford it, are the 2 two-deck penthouse suites.
At the very top end, we've introduced 2 penthouse suites, which I have to say derive from the fact that we had some spaces right at the very front of the ship about which we were scratching our heads how to use. And we realised that the shapes available were absolutely ideal for putting in 2-storey cabins, which became our penthouse suites. And we're using the double height in very dramatic ways. I think clearly having the very high ceiling and the balconied sleeping area gives a very nice effect internally. And then we have a 2-deck high window facing forward, which give a great deal of light and also quite fascinating and dramatic views out to sea, or indeed in port if that's where the ship happens to be at the time.
Unlike most cruise liners, the public decks are to be covered in teak.
We were asked from the beginning because to have this teak decks on board, because P&O is very traditional. The difference what we can find here between Aurora and Oriana is again that we have done developments in between. So we have minimized in part the thickness of the teak deck, let's say to minimize the amount of teak. So the square meters which we have used from Oriana and Aurora, they are nearly the same, but the amount of wood is smaller because we have minimized the thickness with a special system which we have developed here on our shipyard.
Most of the passengers who use Aurora will be British or European, so it's not just teak that's important, but the amount of open deck space as well. The British in particular like plenty of walking room on a ship, to be out in the elements. The only deck areas not teak are the pool sides, which are covered in what's known as bollet. A sort of glue is spread and then covered with tiny gravel particles. The surface is then sealed. One thing that never ever stops on a ship, even after it's finished, is painting. But this is probably the most exciting coat, the first coat. It converts a red-brown hull into something that looks worthy of taking to the high seas. Over 250,000 litres of white paint is used just to cover the basic hull structure, enough to paint the average family's sitting room 50,000 times. Most of the paint used for Aurora comes from International Coatings Akzo Nobel of Gateshead in northern England. They've been making specialist paints for about 100 years, and the business began almost by accident when people started mixing together paint formulas for the shipbuilding industry and thus specializing in marine coatings.
For Aurora, we will supply in total approximately 250,000 litres. And that will satisfy about 90% of the total requirement of coatings for the hull. The specification that we're now using on Aurora is largely based on the materials that we supplied for Oriana, except in the intervening time, we've made certain technical advances, so there's been progress made. The coatings that were used on the external of the hull, for example, have been modified slightly to give us a better gloss. The mechanism by which these types of coating work are by way of a polishing mechanism to release biocide to prevent marine growth on the hull. And our objective now is to try and produce biocides which have little or no effect on the environment. And this has given us an opportunity to introduce biocides which are, for example, used in anti-dandruff shampoos, if you like, that are now used in paint formulations that will work as anti-foulings on ship's hull, but have little or no effect on the environment. The anti-corrosives that will be used on the inside of the Aurora will be supplied in two components that will be mixed just before the application takes place, and they contain an absolute minimum of solvent. This is to reduce the effect the application has on the environment, typically, and to just reduce the waste. So like 93% of the material that's applied will actually be retained in the dry film. So it's somewhat different from the type of material that people will buy in B&Q and apply on their garden gate.
You might not be able to get the paint at your local DIY store, but when it comes to buying fabrics for the ships, it gets closer to home. But not that close. Again, the sheer scale and the number of people who'll be walking on carpets, sitting on chairs and sleeping on beds has to be taken into account by Alison Clixby and the other designers.
In the font, it's basically white with metallic threads in it.
But none of these are right.
No. No, it is a very specialised piece.
So we'll find that.
It's not only the look and the feel and what it's going to mean to the customer which matters. You also have to consider some very practical issues, such as the durability of the materials which are being used, the degree to which you need to oversupply these items so that you can make subsequent repairs in the case of normal wear and tear, which is inevitable with that many people passing through a ship.
The English company of Brinton's, based in Kidderminster, Worcestershire, has supplied the carpets for some 400 ships over the last 10 years. For Aurora, they're making enough carpet to cover 6.5 football pitches.
Well, the total order on the Aurora is 50,000 square metres, and so it's the largest single ship that we've ever carpeted. There were 4 different design firms who were appointed to do the design work for the carpet, and our designers work closely with them to ensure that we get exactly the right effect. Well, this one behind us is going in one of the main staircases, and this one's on a colonial theme. There's also a wonderful black and gold Art Deco one for one of the other staircases. Ships are very complex. There are lots of different areas and they have to each be planned very carefully to ensure that exactly the right carpet is in place in each area. The sizes of the different deck levels all varied and so on, and so nothing is the same. It is complex and it needs very meticulous work to ensure that the right product is made.
Elsewhere in Britain, in the northern English steel town of Sheffield, they're making the cutlery for Aurora. Elkingtons are supplying approximately 5,000 pieces for the ship. It's a mix of stainless steel and silver plate. For such a high-tech ship, it seems bizarre that essentials such as knives, forks and spoons are made in more or less the same way as they were at the time of the Industrial Revolution.
The silver plating process was invented by George and Henry Elkington, and they were granted the first patent in 1840. The company immediately began making high-quality silver tableware, silver-plated tableware and cutlery for the various hotels around the world, and immediately got into cruise lines. Records show at the Maritime Museum in Greenwich that our silverware was used by all the major cruise lines, and more recently P&O have taken our silverware for Victoria, Canberra, Arcadia, Oriana, and now of course Aurora. The pattern selected by P&O for Aurora is a Dubarry pattern, which is a design which is over 200 years old, probably 250 years old, influenced by Chippendale and named after one of Louis XVI's mistresses, Countess Dubarry. Elkington is making all the stainless steel and silver-plated tableware for Aurora. That includes the crew cutlery as well, and items for the accommodation as well as the restaurant areas.
Another English town, Stoke-on-Trent, is the location of Steelite, the company that's landed the contract to provide the ship's crockery.
We're actually supplying, I would say, 95% of the vessel, of which 75% of that will be the special sunburst design, which we actually commissioned for P&O. The other 15% that we're actually doing for the vessel is for the Orangery restaurant, which is a special colour design that we've commissioned here in-house, and we actually designed that to complement the new table designs that they've actually got involved the Orangery restaurant. The most important factor is wear and tear. We here at Steelite know that if our product is going to be given a fair trial, then we would trial it on any cruise ship because the wear and tear factor is immense.
And from low-tech to high-tech. Using computer simulations, Captain Steve Burgoyne gets a chance to take Aurora in and out of some of the ports the ship will be using, even before she leaves the shipyard.
Right, now the thing is now we're turning to port and the wind should start to take a bit of effect like it did last time.
The wind should catch the port.
It'll be interesting to see how much it does push it. So I would fully, with the speed down to 1.5 knots, I'd fully expect it now to get a good rate of turn, which it is, it's increasing rate. Well, we've come into this course here with BMT to take the ship through its paces driving-wise. They've produced this computer program, feeding into it all the things of the ship, in other words, the structure of the ship and how it's expected to act, the power it's got, the thruster capability and everything else. And by utilising that with the control panel, we can actually drive the ship into some of the harbours we're going to visit. We can add things like wind, current and everything else, so we can get a good idea of how the ship is going to handle when we get to these ports ahead of time, which is quite beneficial really. These systems are now portable. We can put them on the ships and the junior officers can practice on board the ship in handling any ship. We've got it on Oriana, Victoria, Grand Princess, and we will have a set-up on Aurora as well.
In the German shipyard, Aurora's hull has now been completely painted. At last, she looks like an ocean-going vessel. The engines, which have been sitting idle since they were first delivered and fitted months ago, are fired up, watched over anxiously by engineers from their manufacturers, MAN, B&W.
MAN have been on site from the first day that the first engine has actually been fired up, and so they have been here since early October doing their pre-checks and there from the firing up. But of course the engines have always been tested on the test bed at the builders, so they know and they are shipped in their entirety after they've been on the test bed, so they know they do work to a certain extent, but obviously in the ship is a different matter.
The prop shafts are run, but not too fast as the propellers still have to be fitted. Everything is checked and double-checked. Memories of initial vibration problems on sister ship Oriana are still recent in the memory. No one wants to repeat the experience. The propellers have been delivered from the ABB factory in Poland. They'll drive the ship at speeds of up to 24 knots, and in its first year, Aurora will sail 83,000 nautical miles, the equivalent of 4 complete circumnavigations of the globe.
Many years ago, propellers used to be fitted with a key and a keyway to transmit the torque from the propeller shaft into the propeller. And these keyways gave endless problems because they were a stress raiser within the shaft. And you used to get cracks in the propeller shaft, and then the propeller shafts would have to be condemned and replaced with new ones, which was obviously a considerable expense. Now the torque from the propeller shaft to the propeller is transmitted entirely by friction. There is no key between the shaft and the propeller. But obviously, to transmit that torque by friction, you need a tight fit between the propeller and the propeller shaft. And so you have to push the propeller up the propeller shaft taper with a hydraulic jack. And it's very critical to measure the distance the propeller goes up the propeller shaft taper to make sure that it's the correct fit on the shaft, because if you push it too far up the taper, you can overstress the propeller hub and damage it. And if you don't press it far enough up, there won't be enough friction between the shaft and the propeller, and of course the propeller may then eventually slip on the shaft, which would be a disaster.
And disaster is not a word that the men and women of P&O want anywhere near their new superliner. In northern Germany, the pace is hotting up on the construction of the new P&O superliner Aurora. The finishing touches are being made to the ship's funnel.
Every ship owner has his own idea about his funnel. So this is an emblem sometimes which creates more problem than you could expect. Especially this funnel we have had several times in the wind tunnel test to be sure that we will not get any curd shot from exhaust gases into the ship back in the air-conditioned section lines and so on. So this, you have to consider that also from all the wind directions, you have to make sure that you will not get any smoke back into the ship.
Despite its appearance, a funnel isn't just a hollowed chimney. It's as complicated a piece of machinery as many other parts of the ship.
Inside the funnel we have all the exhaust gases of the engines, as well as those one of the incinerators and boiler, and also the vent pipes which you will have from sewage plants and so on. So all the bad odor we are bringing up to the top of the vessel to make sure that we got no backflow.
Sliced through, the funnel looks a bit like a Swiss cheese. Another bit of heavy plant that's almost ready is the chain and anchor. Aurora stands 62 meters tall, 10 meters higher than Niagara Falls. It's a big ship and needs a great deal of heavy chain.
When you anchor the ship, it's probably the chain that does more of the work in holding the ship in position than the anchor. So the longer and the heavier the chain you can have, the better the anchoring of the ship is. But of course there's a trade-off between the weight and the space you need for the anchor and the amount of chain and the weight of chain that you would like to have. And our nautical experts within the new building department, that's something they consider in every ship design, and they try and optimize the weight and the length of the chain to give the best anchoring performance whilst avoiding too much weight and space inside the ship.
At last, the dock in which the ship has been built is being fully flooded in preparation for the ship to be moved out of the yard. For the captain, it's an emotional moment.
Today is a very big landmark in this ship coming out. I was last here in September, and to come back today and see the leaps and bounds that have been made to the ship was colossal, you know, really looking fantastic now. And to see it move out sort of brings a bit of a lump there, you know. That's my ship coming out, so I'm looking forward to that.
With its funnel fitted, the ship is moved out into the open dock in preparation for the 45-kilometre journey down to the sea. The yard is hitting the deadline so far, but despite the placid outward appearance of the ship, there are literally hundreds of people on board working furiously on everything from the air conditioning through the electricity supplies to laying carpets. The yard. Now, they only have around 4 months left before they have to hand over the ship to P&O. And things are looking tight. The question is, will they make the deadline?
Stay tuned for the last programme on this 21st century liner. There are sea trials in Holland, and her maiden voyage is to the Mediterranean, all caught on camera in a couple of minutes. And just a reminder, there's plenty to supplement our programmes online at discoveryeurope.com.